The lower decks of Cerulus' spire were a place where no one lingered by choice. A maze of rusted corridors and trembling vent shafts where the air smelled of solvent fumes, mold and metal that had been left to corrode. People passed through quickly, collars drawn up, eyes down, eager to escape before the burn in their lungs forced them to cough. No one stayed, and anyone who did was met with turned heads and muttered disdain. In one corner of a humming shaft, beneath a vent that rattled with uneven pressure, two sisters sat with their knees pulled to their chests, their bodies pressed close as if each could shield the other from the world that had already dismissed them. Nara, older by only minutes, but carrying herself as though years separated them, held her back stiff and her chin high even in rags, a small act of defiance against the collapse of their once proud bloodline. Sarah stayed beside her, smaller, thinner, quieter, her pale gold eyes lowered unless her sister pushed her to speak. Their crimson skin had dulled to brownish red under layers of grime, their long white hair clumped with grease, their scent a chemical tang that made every passerby wrinkle their nose and quicken their steps. This was their world, now hunger and shame so entangled they had become the same sensation. The steady ache of being seen as less than human, less than worth a second glance. A Drien core noticed them because he never looked away. He was a logistics planner in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his black tunic and slate trousers marked with the insignia of his division. His days were built from timetables and cargo maps, numbers aligned with lines so precise it left no room for error. He valued order because order meant safety, and he had long ago resigned himself to the quiet rhythm of work, food, and sleep. He was not a man who sought attention, nor one who invited company, but he had never been able to walk past suffering without it catching somewhere deep in his chest. As he slowed near the vent, the stench struck him hard enough to make his eyes water, a sharp reminder of why others hurried past. For a moment, instinct urged him to do the same. Responsibility meant exposure. Exposure meant questions. And questions in the spire often led to trouble. Yet when he saw the twins' bowed heads, their shoulders drawn tight as if they expected to be ignored, a raw memory twisted in him, the memory of what it felt like to be treated as though one's existence was an inconvenience. He set his bag down, unfastened his coat, and before doubt could harden his resolve to indifference, he draped the heavy fabric across Nara's shoulders. She flinched at the contact, her body taut like a wire, her pale eyes narrowing beneath the grime. "We don't need favors," she said, her voice low but edged with defiance that had survived where everything else had been stripped away. Adrien did not raise his voice or shift his stance. He met her suspicion with calm steadiness. "You're not breathing air," he replied evenly. "You're breathing solvent fumes. Stay here long enough and your lungs will collapse." Sarah lifted her head for the first time in hours, her voice thin and almost apologetic. "People tell us to leave." Adrien shook his head once. "I'm not telling you to leave. I'm asking you to come with me." His words were simple, delivered without pity or coaxing, as if he were listing cargo on a manifest. Nara studied him, her jaw tight, searching his face for the catch, the trap, the angle every other man carried when he looked their way. She found nothing, no calculation, no hunger, only the blunt steadiness of someone who had already decided what he would do, regardless of what she thought of him. That unsettled her more than open cruelty. "What do you want?" she pressed. Adrien did not flinch. "Food, water, then we talk." The silence stretched, filled by the hum of the vent and the steady drip of condensation from a cracked pipe above. Finally, Nara rose, pulling Sarah with her, her pride forcing her to stand tall even when her knees trembled. "We walk," she said, "but not behind you." Adrien inclined his head in acceptance, neither leading nor pushing. only pacing steady so that they could follow without feeling dragged. The corridor quieted as they moved, the air thick with the stares of clerks and workers who coughed into sleeves or looked away, muttering as if the twins' presence were a contagion. Adrien ignored them. He keyed the lift, stepped aside so the sisters could enter first, and let the doors close. Inside, the air was cleaner, processed, its sterile bite a relief after the stench below. Sarah pressed her palm to the rail, her eyes still downcast. "We smell," she whispered, shame clinging to the words. Adrien's reply was steady, deliberate. "You smell like chemicals. That's not the same as being unclean." Both sisters stilled at the distinction, caught off guard by the clarity of it. No one had ever separated the two before. As the lift climbed, light flickered through a glass slit, revealing the ocean glinting turquoise far below and pale clouds drifting across the horizon. Adrien said nothing, only kept his gaze on the floor number until it stopped, but the silence had changed. For the first time in weeks, the twins felt that maybe someone had seen them without recoiling, and that recognition was enough to make them follow him through. The doors into a world they had not believed they would be allowed to enter again. Adrien's quarters were nothing like the lower decks they had left behind. They were small, yes, but precise, each object placed as if part of an ordered grid. A narrow couch hugged the wall. A low table stood polished and bare, and by the wide window a clay pot held a single green plant stretching toward pale daylight. For the twins, who had grown used to metal walls sweating with condensation, the clean air here felt foreign, too thin, too sharp, as though it might cut their lungs. They stepped inside warily, their shoulders tight, their bodies tense with the instinct to flee if a hidden snare revealed itself. Adrien closed the lock behind them, his motion calm, deliberate, as if he were sealing a routine cargo hatch. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. They stayed standing, stiff, as though lowering themselves into a chair would mean surrender. Adrien did not argue. He turned instead to a cabinet, drew a basin, and filled it with water warm enough that faint steam curled into the air. He placed soap and 2 clean towels beside it and rolled up his sleeves. "I'll clean your arms and hair first," he said in the same tone he might use to note an entry on a ledger. "If you want me to stop, say so." Nara's eyes snapped to the door one more time, suspicion flaring, but pride would not let her retreat. She pressed her palms flat on the table. "I'll go first." Adrien worked with a steadiness that disarmed more than any gentle words could have. His cloth passed over Nara's arms in careful strokes, lifting layers of blackened grime without commentary. When his hands found scars, he did not linger. When he reached her collar, he did not look away from her face, only asked, "Any wounds that sting? Any reaction to soap?" Each time she shook her head, unwilling to admit pain, but noting in silence that he asked at all. When he finished, the towel he laid aside was stained near black, but the skin he revealed gleamed a deeper red beneath, raw in places, but alive, no longer lost under the suffocating layer of chemicals. Nara's pride held her stiff, but something in her shoulders eased. She had expected humiliation. She had found only precision. Sarah hesitated, her fingers curling into the edge of her ragged wrap, but Adrien tapped the basin once. "Warm enough," he said. His voice held no coaxing, no plea, just a fact stated, as though the water itself asked nothing of her. Slowly she sat. Adrien repeated the process with greater patience, aware of the way her body flinched at each pass, especially when the cloth brushed behind her ear where the grime had caked hardest. He paused each time until she nodded, granting him silent permission. By the end, the water was murky, gray with oil and dust, but Sarah's skin shone with its true luster again, her hair no longer clumped, but falling heavy and smooth around her face. The odor that had clung to them so fiercely had lifted, leaving only the faint earthy scent of soap and damp hair. Adrien stepped back, wringing the cloth into the basin. He did not comment, did not linger over the change that even they could feel, the way the air in the room no longer burned with acrid sourness. Instead, he moved to a drawer, drew out dark silk scraps and a strip of black mesh, and placed them neatly on the table. "Clean fabric," he said. "Not much, but better than what you wear." Then, with the same quiet order as before, he turned to the cook plate and set a pot to warm. Steam rose quickly, carrying the mild scent of roots simmering in water, filling the room with a softness neither sister had known in weeks. They exchanged a glance half doubt, half disbelief, and then began to wrap themselves in the cloth, moving awkwardly in the foreign feel of clean fabric. Adrien did not watch. He stirred porridge until it bubbled, poured it into 3 bowls, and placed them on the table. "Eat while it's hot." Nara stood tall, chin lifted, eyes locked on him as if daring him to look away. Sarah cradled her bowl between her palms, glancing around the ordered apartment as if mapping exits, still uncertain of the trap that must be hidden here. Adrien simply ate, his movements measured, unhurried, the same way he balanced figures in his ledger. When the silence stretched, Nara broke it, her voice edged with challenge. "Why us?" Adrien swallowed before answering. "Because you were there." Sarah's voice, soft, almost disbelieving, followed. "People could help every day. They don't." Adrien looked at her directly. "I do when I can." The heater ticked against the wall. Rain began to tap faintly at the window, streaking the glass in crooked lines. The room felt different now, warmer, still tense, but alive. Nara set her empty bowl down with finality. "We'll stay tonight," she said, her tone sharp, "but no debts." Adrien inclined his head. "Ben don't owe me. Just live." Sarah's lips curved, the faintest shadow of a smile breaking through weeks of silence. Adrien caught it and made a decision without announcing it. They would not go back to the vent, not while he had breath to stop it. The rain outside thickened, and inside the small apartment above the ocean, 3 lives shifted fraction by fraction towards something none of them had expected: shelter, choice, and the fragile beginning of belonging. Dark night settled over Cerulus Spire, with the steady rhythm of rain against the glass window and the low hum of the heater ticking in cycles. A sound that might have been comforting if not for how foreign it felt to the sisters. Nara sat rigid in her chair, arms folded, her damp braid resting against one shoulder like a shield, her pale golden eyes fixed on Adrien, as if sheer vigilance could force him to reveal hidden intent. Sarah sat smaller, her knees drawn together, fingers curled into the edge of the blanket Adrien had placed near her seat, her gaze flitting between the couch, the door, and her sister, as though mapping every possible escape route. Adrien himself moved with quiet precision, stacking bowls into the sink, rinsing them clean with water measured down to the drop, his motions as exact as they had been when he wiped grime from their arms earlier. It was the routine of a man who had built a life out of order, and in that order the sisters felt both trapped and strangely steadied. When Adrien turned off the tap and dried his hands, he looked at them without hesitation. "The bed is yours," he said. "Both of you." He gestured toward the half wall that separated the room. "I'll take the couch." The statement cut the air like a blade. Nara rose at once, suspicion hardening into defiance. "No," she snapped. "We stay together." Adrien's reply came calm, immovable. "You will. Both of you in the bed. I'll take the couch. It isn't negotiable." Sarah's eyes widened, caught between her sister's instinct to fight and the quiet relief the words stirred in her chest. She looked at Adrien, studied the line of his jaw, the stillness in his eyes, and whispered, "He means it." Nara's gaze narrowed further, her pride unwilling to surrender. But she saw the red glow of the privacy field along the door edges, the lock sealed from inside. No one could come in unless Adrien allowed it. Slowly, she gave a single nod. "Fine," she said, her tone sharp as a knife. "But the door stays locked." Adrien inclined his head. "It already is." The sisters climbed onto the narrow bed together, their bodies tense beneath the thin blanket. Nara draped her arm across Sarah's side, her instinctive guard even stronger here than in the vent shafts, her eyes open long after her sisters closed. Every small sound, the creak of the couch as Adrien settled onto it, the sigh of the heater, kept her on edge. She expected him to move in the night, to test the fragile promise he had spoken. But Adrien lay still, his breathing even, his hands folded across his chest as if he had nothing to hide. Time stretched in silence until Sarah's breathing deepened beside her, steady and soft in a way it had not been in months. Nara listened, realizing she had not seen her sister rest like this since before the disease had scattered their family, since before the shame of the spire had settled over them like a shroud. Her own chest ached at the sound, torn between distrust and the faintest sliver of hope. Morning came with pale gray light slipping through the wide window, painting the room in muted tones of silver. The rain had stopped, leaving the ocean below calm and glassy, a horizon stretching farther than either sister had seen in years. Adrien was already awake, seated at the table with a ledger pad open, his eyes tracing columns of numbers he seemed to know by memory. He had not slept much. His posture betrayed the stiffness of a night spent on the couch, but he moved with the same precision as always, the rhythm of a man who found comfort in control. Nara stirred first, her eyes opening to a ceiling too clean to belong to her. For a moment, confusion flooded her, then she remembered the night before, her arms still draped protectively over Sarah, who slept deeply. Her face softened into a calm Adrien had never witnessed. Nara turned her gaze to the table, to the man who worked in silence, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He noticed her eyes, but did not comment. He closed the ledger, stood, and poured water from a purifier into a pot, setting it on the cook plate until the earthy scent of varan root spread through the room. He set out 3 cups without ceremony, his tone even. "How long since you ate properly?" Nara hesitated, caught off guard by the directness. 4 days. Maybe 5. Adrien nodded once, not pitying, not lecturing. "Your bodies need steady food, not scraps. You'll eat before anything else." Sarah woke to the smell, her lashes fluttering, confusion giving way to the sight of the blanket tucked neatly around her. Her first words, fragile but certain, broke the stillness. "You didn't touch us." Adrien looked up from the pot, his voice plain. "No, I said you were safe. I meant it." The word struck Sarah harder than she expected, loosening a knot in her chest she had carried so long it felt permanent. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, her shoulders lowering as if a weight had been lifted. Nara studied her sister's expression, realizing Adrien had answered a question neither of them had dared ask aloud. The root broth simmered, filling the room with warmth. And for the first time in weeks, the day began without fear clinging to their skin. The day Adrien chose to take them. Outside began with hesitation thick in the air. The spire's shift bell, echoing faintly through the upper corridors, while the apartment carried only the scent of warmed root, broth, and the faint rustle of fabric as Sarah combed her hair with the wooden teeth Adrien had given her. Nara paced the narrow floor with restless steps, her pride making her sharp even in silence, every movement a reminder that trust was still brittle. Adrien finished his simple breakfast, set his slate aside, and spoke as if it were already decided. "You don't have to stay hidden today. We'll walk the market on level 20. Morning is quiet there." His tone was calm, even, but it pulled both sisters into stillness. Nara narrowed her eyes, suspicion quick to spark. They'll stare harder. Adrien met her look without flinching. They will, but you'll be walking beside me. That changes what they dare to say. Sarah's hands stilled on the comb, her lips parting with something like disbelief. No one had ever offered to stand against stairs with them, not openly. Adrien's quiet certainty left no room for argument. The journey down the lift was long in silence. The glass slid in the wall, offering slivers of turquoise ocean below. Thin clouds stretched pale across the horizon. Sarah pressed her palm against the rail, her stomach tight with both nerves and something unfamiliar anticipation. Nara stood stiff beside her, her jaw set, every muscle prepared to turn back at the first sign of humiliation. Adrien simply kept his eyes on the floor number, hands loose at his sides, posture steady. When the lift doors slid open, the market light struck hard and artificial. Strips of pale glow stretching across rows of stalls, where vendors muttered half-heartedly about dried roots, fabric scraps, and canned proteins. Conversations faltered as the three stepped into view. People turned, some glancing quickly away, others staring openly, their noses twitching as if memory alone could summon the smell that had once clung to the sisters. Sarah's shoulders dipped, but Adrien's stride remained steady, each step measured, neither rushed nor hesitant. Nara saw the way people shifted back, how their gazes darted between Adrien's insignia and the crimson figures beside him, and though her pride burned, she realized that silence from strangers weighed less than silence from him at a produce stall. Adrien picked up a handful of dried Draxon mushrooms, lifted them to his nose, and paid without haggling. The vendor's eyes flicked to the twins, lips curling as if ready to spit. But Adrien's presence was a wall calm, broad-shouldered, unflinching. He handed the bag not to Nara, who bristled with suspicion, but to Sarah, whose fingers trembled as she accepted it. "Carry this," he said. Not an order meant to belittle, but a simple involvement, a recognition that she was part of the moment. Sarah blinked, clutching the bag close, the faintest warmth rising in her chest. For once, she was not being told to move along, to disappear, to be less. She was being asked to exist, and that changed everything. Nara caught the shift in her sister's expression, the way her shoulders eased even under stares, and though she clenched her jaw, some part of her guardedness loosened. The return to the apartment felt different than the departure. The market's pale lights faded behind them, whispers trailing in their wake, but Adrien did not acknowledge a single one. His silence was armor stronger than any denial. Inside, the lock sealed with its faint glow, the outside world cut off. Adrien set the bag on the counter, removed his coat, and turned to Nara with the same even tone he had used at the vent. "You'll cook tonight." Her brows furrowed, suspicion flashing. "You want me to?" "I want you to," he confirmed. "You said you don't beg. Show me you don't need to." The challenge unsettled her. This was not pity, not charity, but an invitation to stand as she once had, capable, respected. Her pride found something steady to grasp, and though she scowled, she pulled the mushrooms from the bag with sharp, certain movements, while Nara chopped with practiced precision. Sarah sat at the table beside Adrien, turning the braid in her hands, her quiet voice almost lost beneath the rhythm of the knife. "You don't talk much, do you?" Adrien said, not unkindly, simply stating a fact. Sarah shook her head. "Talking doesn't change anything." Adrien's reply came firm. "It changes the rule. When you speak, people listen, even your sister." Sarah's lips parted, startled by the weight of the statement. A laugh escaped her, small and shy. "Nara doesn't listen to anyone." Adrien didn't glance at the counter where Nara worked, but his voice carried certainty. "She listens to you." The words struck deep, sparking something fragile and bright in Sarah's chest. When dinner was served, sharp-scented mushrooms with strips of warmed Xeron bread, Adrien tasted without ceremony, chewing with the same measured calm as always. "Good," he said. Nara snapped back. "That's it." "That's it," he answered. "Good food doesn't need speeches." For the first time in months, Nara's laugh broke free, low and genuine, catching even her by surprise. Sarah smiled faintly, the room warmer than it had ever been. That night, when they sat together by the wide window, the ocean stretched dark beyond, dotted with glimmers of distant transport lights. The spire hummed on, indifferent, but inside the small apartment, the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers, or the silence of shame. It was a quiet heavy with choice, with the fragile thread of belonging, weaving itself slowly into three lives that had never expected to cross. And though none of them spoke it aloud, each felt it, the beginning of something that would not be undone. The following days settled into a rhythm neither of the sisters had believed possible, a rhythm that felt almost like life before their exile, but sharper, cleaner, because every small act now carried weight. Adrien woke early, as he always had, the scrape of a chair and the scratch of his slate pen marking the dawn. He would measure numbers from memory, check manifests, plan routes, his mind weaving the order of the spire into neat columns no one else noticed, but everyone depended on. Nara would stir next, restless as ever, pacing the small apartment with her arms folded until she found something to occupy her hand-sorting fabric scraps, cleaning bowls, adjusting the heater's setting. Sarah rose slowest, her movements careful, her eyes softened by real sleep. She lingered near the window, watching the ocean beyond, sometimes humming a tune too faint for even herself to hear. It was during one of these quiet mornings that Adrien set a comb, a flask of scalp oil, and a folded cloth on the couch with the same precision he placed cargo seals on a crate. "It's easier if someone helps," he said, rolling up his sleeves. Nara's suspicion ignited instantly. "We can manage." Adrien's reply was simple. "You both need care. Let me do it right. If you don't like it, stop me." The words hung heavy, not command, not pity choice. Sarah surprised them both by stepping forward first. She sat on the floor before him, placing the comb in his hand without speaking. Adrien poured the oil into his palm, rubbed it warm, and smoothed it through her hair from root to tip, his fingers parting strands with patience, the comb following in measured strokes. At first her shoulders trembled, flinching at every shift, but slowly the rhythm steadied her. Her breath slowed, her posture eased. By the time Adrien tied her hair into a loose braid, Sarah's lips carried the faintest, shy smile. She touched the smooth rope of white hair and whispered, "Thank you." Nara stood frozen, caught between pride and the unwilling admission that her sister's face looked lighter than it had in weeks. She could not bear to appear weak, yet refusing would look weaker still. With a sharp sigh, she dropped onto the floor. "Do it then." Adrien repeated the process, his touch firm, deliberate, never straying. Nara studied him in the mirror, propped against the wall, searching for the flicker of hunger or falsehood she expected, but his eyes stayed steady, fixed on the work. When his fingers brushed the back of her neck, her breath caught not from fear, but from how intentional the touch was, controlled instead of careless. "You treat us like," she began, then stopped. Adrien glanced up. "Like what?" Her voice sharpened. "Like women." Adrien's reply came without hesitation. "That's what you are." The words struck her harder than any kindness had in months, not wrapped in pity or pretense, but spoken as fact, immovable as steel. She held his gaze in the mirror, and for the first time did not look away. Evenings became shared ritual. Adrien would bring back supplies, roots, dried grains, the occasional strip of fish, and Nara cooked with sharp, efficient movements, demanding without words that he judge her skill. Adrien would taste, nod once, and say, "Good." It infuriated her, then disarmed her, until one night she laughed aloud, surprising even herself. Sarah filled the gaps with quiet gestures, folding towels, braiding her sister's hair, setting the table with care. Their laughter, faint but real, filled corners of the apartment where silence once hung like weight. Adrien spoke little, but when he did, the words settled deep. When Sarah asked him once, "Why let us in?" he answered with steady eyes, "Because I don't like what this spire does to people. I won't be part of it." Nara pressed harder. "What if people start asking questions?" Adrien's tone didn't shift. "Then they ask me. I don't answer." His blunt certainty left them speechless, suspicion melting into something heavier, trust, unwanted but undeniable. One night, after dinner, they sat by the window again, the ocean stretching dark, dotted with faint transport lights. Sarah leaned against her sister, her head warm on Nara's shoulder. Nara braced herself to keep guard, but found her own body leaning back against the wall, less tense than before. Adrien broke the quiet at last, his voice certain. "If you stay, you live here as yourselves. Not as ghosts, not as shadows. That's the only condition." His words left no room for bargaining. Nara's lips parted, ready with an argument, but none came. She searched his face, expecting cracks, falsehoods. She found none. Sarah's soft yes slipped into the air, barely audible, but carrying the weight of choice. The silence that followed was no longer distance. It was something else, raw, fragile, alive. For the first time, the spire outside felt far away, its cold whispers muted, while inside the narrow apartment, the beginnings of family, of belonging, had taken root. Rain had returned by the time Adrien came home with the final parcel that would change everything. The faint orange glow of the heater lighting the apartment in warmth against the storm. He set the small box on the table with the same precision he used when logging manifests. But the sisters knew at once it was not just another routine. Nara straightened, her chin high, eyes narrowed, suspicion alive even after days of food, warmth, and quiet laughter. Sarah's fingers tightened around the braid Adrien had made that morning, her heart unsteady, but her gaze unable to look away. Adrien opened the box slowly, revealing 3 plain silver bands, dull from years in storage, unadorned tokens salvaged long ago from a shipment he had been tasked to catalog. He slid them across the table, his voice even but carrying a weight that filled the room. "If you stay," he said, "we should mark it. Not as debt, not as pity, as choice." For a moment, silence pressed in with the sound of the storm. Sarah reached first, almost without thought, her small hands lifting a ring and slipping it onto Adrien's finger with care. Nara's pride burned hot, her breath sharp, but she could not bear to let her sister stand alone. She seized another band, shoved it roughly onto his other hand, her movements harsh, but final, her eyes daring him to question. Adrien did not flinch. Instead, he took the 3rd band, and with the same calmness he had shown since the vent, pressed it onto Nara's hand. For Sarah, who had none left, he tied a woven cord around her wrist, a promise until more could be made. The act was quiet, stripped of ritual, but binding in a way words could never touch. They sat together afterward by the window, the ocean horizon blurred by rain, the city lights smeared into streaks across the glass. Sarah curled against Adrien's side, her cheek resting lightly on his shoulder, her cord-wrapped wrist against his chest where his heartbeat was steady. Nara leaned on his other side, her head tilted, her pride still alive but softer now, her body finally resting where it once would have resisted. Adrien held them both, his arms steady, his eyes on the dark expanse beyond the spire. For the first time, The silence in the apartment was not the emptiness of strangers, but the fullness of a home. The days that followed confirmed what the bands had declared. Adrien's routines bent but did not break. He still woke early, still worked his ledgers, still valued order. But now the apartment breathed with 3 lives instead of 1. Nara cooked, sharp and focused, demanding his blunt nods of approval and smirking when he gave them. Sarah filled the space with quiet warmth, cleaning, braiding, humming, laughter returning to her voice in pieces. Adrien's precision became more than habit. It became stability they could lean against. Neighbors whispered when they walked together through the corridors, eyes narrowing, lips curling, but Adrien never slowed, never answered, and his silence silenced more than argument could. Inside the locked door, they were untouchable. One evening, as they shared root stew and dark seed coffee, the storm outside faded into calm, and Adrien looked at the sisters with a steadiness that made Nara frown. "There is something you should know," he said. His tone carried no ceremony, only fact. "The bands I gave you, they're not just scraps. They're registry tokens, catalogued years ago, part of a shipment marked from Ilar Station's Royal Archive." Nara's bowl paused halfway to her lips, her eyes flashing sharp. Sarah froze, her hand against her wrist cord. Adrien continued, calm but firm. "When I filed my manifest this morning, the system recognized them. It listed you both as heirs to a displaced bloodline, thought extinct." The room stilled, the heater ticking loud in the silence. Nara's pride flared into a sharp, defensive edge. "You mean," Adrien nodded, "you're not just survivors of the vent. You're exiles of a royal house. And now, by law, by record, you are bound to me." The final revelation crashed into the room, heavier than any storm outside. Sarah's eyes filled with fear and wonder. Nara's jaw clenched, fury and disbelief warring with a strange glimmer of hope. Adrien did not flinch under their stares. "You chose me," he said simply. "Now the Spire will know it, and the world beyond." The silence that followed was thick, trembling with the weight of a future none of them had expected. But beneath it, threaded through the fear and shock, was the truth that bound them more strongly than law. Choice had led them here, and choice would keep them together, no matter what the Spire whispered next. The news of their registry spread faster than Adrien expected. The Spire's whisper network, carrying it from clerk to janitor to overseer until it reached ears that had long forgotten the twins' names. By the time Adrien walked the sisters through the market again, eyes did not only stare with disdain. They measured, calculating, some widening in recognition of lineage, thought extinguished. Nara felt it first, the weight of stares that no longer dismissed her, but tracked her, as though she had been restored to something she hadn't chosen. Her shoulders stiffened, her chin rose, but this time her pride was less armor and more declaration. She was not broken, and she would not bow. Sarah stayed close, her hand brushing Adrien's arm, her wrist cord hidden under her sleeve, yet pulsing in her mind like fire. The whispers were harsher now, more dangerous. Some spat that Adrien had stolen what wasn't his. Others muttered that a human had no right to step into blood older than the Spire itself. Adrien's stride didn't falter. His silence remained their shield, but his eyes were sharper, scanning, calculating routes and dangers the way he mapped cargo flows. When they returned, the apartment felt smaller, its walls closing in with the press of consequences. Adrien set the parcels down, his movements still precise, but slower, heavier, as if even order could not mask what was coming. Nara paced, her voice sharp. "So we are heirs again, bound by law to a man who should never have been allowed near the archive." Her words carried anger, but beneath it lay something harder to admit: fear. Adrien met her gaze with calm certainty. "I didn't plan this, but I won't undo it. If you want out, you leave. The law cannot chain you. Not here. Sarah looked between them, her voice trembling but firm. We've lived invisible for so long. Now they see us. Maybe for the wrong reasons, but they see us. Her words, so rarely spoken, carried weight. Nara's retort died on her tongue. Adrien stepped closer, his voice low. Then decide. Do you stand with me, or do you let them define you again? The silence that followed was a crucible. The rain outside beat harder against the glass. The heater hummed with soft ticks, and for the first time since they had left the vent, the sisters' eyes locked not on Adrien, but on each other. Nara's pride wavered, her jaw clenched, but Sarah's quiet steadiness anchored her. Slowly, she turned back to Adrien. If the spire thinks you stole us, then let them come. They'll learn we chose you. Her voice was iron now, forged in defiance. Sarah nodded, her eyes soft but steady. We stay? Adrien inclined his head once, a soldier acknowledging allies. The air in the room shifted no longer fragile trust. But bond declared, bond tested. That night, the three of them sat by the window as always, but the silence was different, charged with the knowledge that the world outside would no longer let them be shadows. Nara leaned against Adrien, not out of suspicion but claim. Sarah curled close on his other side, her smile faint but certain. Adrien wrapped his arms around them both, steady and unshaken. Beyond the rain-smeared glass, the spire's lights flickered like watchful eyes. But inside, in the ordered rhythm of one small apartment, choice had become defiance, and defiance had become love. Whatever came next, whispers, threats, challenges, would not find them alone. They had chosen, and in that choice they had become more than forgotten exiles, or a solitary man with ledgers. They had become a family the spire could not erase.